All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dr. Lawrence Rashid, and I'm the African American Student Coordinator. But enough about me. You're not here for me, you're here for these gentlemen to my left and to my right. So, I'd like to start with the acknowledgement that the land that we are on is traditional homelands of the Kalapuya people. The Kalapuya are stewards of this very land over 14,000 years before the traditional way of life was forever disrupted and destroyed. We're starting this meeting or this discussion with humility and reverence for the original inhabitants, the Kalapuya people. All right, so I'm gonna start off with our guest who came from California, good friend, mentor, Jigna, Dr. Allender. Dr. Allender, welcome. Thank you for being here. Please briefly introduce yourself. Again, it's a pleasure for us to have you here.
Well, first of all, thank you, Dr. Rashid. Thank you to Lane College. Thank you for having me out here tonight. Thank you to my students in SAC who are joining us as well, and for any of the other students that are out there in the virtual space. I'm an associate professor at Sacramento State University in the College of Education, teaching credentials in literacy, and increasingly, as we move ethnic studies into a K-12 world, ethnic studies education as well. I dabble a little bit other places. I'm also adjunct at Mills College, where I'm teaching a course called Power to the People, which is an exploration of independent, community-based education, principally in the Oakland area, but beyond as well. And then I've been really involved in the ethnic studies movement, but mostly from a K-12 standpoint, right? Trying to get legislation, trying to get, well, I don't want to say try, right? We've been successful with getting statewide legislation, with getting district resolutions in many districts throughout the state, and then also in doing the curriculum and professional development as well in ethnic studies. So happy to be here and happy to have this dialogue with you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Allender. Okay, and my colleague, Dr. Samino, thank you for being here. Really, conversation we had, I think it was way back on Veterans Day. Yeah, about bringing this to fruition, and here we are. So thank you, Dr. Samino. It was really your brainchild as much more as anyone else's to have this ethnic studies talk. So again, thank you, and please introduce yourself to our audience that's present and those who are listening via Zoom.
Hello, I'm Michael Samino. I'm the coordinator of ethnic studies at Lane Community College. I came here in 1999 to actually restart an ethnic studies program. We started as a Black Studies program in 1969-1970 academic school year. And that was very, very early on for those of us that tracked kind of the founding of that academic discipline. I teach introductory courses like Ethnic Studies 101, 102. I also teach Chicano Latino Studies courses, and then I work with other faculty to have other pieces of kind of what I view as a comprehensive ethnic studies program. I'm a sociologist by training, so I think that probably influences some of the decisions that I make. I'm originally from this region, born and raised here, so it was kind of odd when I showed up in 1999 to be around some people who, for example, some of my students over the years have been people that I went to high school with, or the children of people that were friends of mine growing up, or my own family members. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing to consider. For the last 3 years, I've been doing a lot of direct work with the local high schools and with teachers interested in offering Ethnic Studies 101 in their high schools. And so we enter into these kind of year-long, probably I should say mentoring, but I would rather say collaborative relationships. And so the part of me that's kind of the kid who's from here and really experienced a pretty flat educational experience to now imagine, students like my own sons who are in the local schools, that they can take this type of curriculum, I really, really feel a deep affinity towards that. And then I like this structure tonight because one of the classic tenets of critical race theory is for us to be able to tell stories. So, I mean, it's for the people that get all kind of upset about critical race theory and probably don't really even understand what it is. Well, part of it is the telling of stories, but the telling of stories from our perspectives, not somebody telling my story, but rather me telling my own story. So, hopefully.
All right.
Sorry.
No.
I'm trying to keep it brief.
No, you're fine. Thank you. So we're off to a great start. So again, I'm going to ask these two scholars 2 questions each. And even if the question is not directed to you, you still could chime in. So I don't want you to think like, oh, that's a good question, I want to answer that. No, you still can chime in. So first, these are loaded questions, all right? Anyone who's seen me before knows that it's like a mini dissertation and then the questions at the end. So I'll try to make sure to enunciate so you hear the question in the context. And then the first question is going to go to Dr. Alder. So according to Jason Fierra, who's a professor in the Department of Race and Resistance Studies at San Francisco State College of Ethnic Studies, Fierra has spent years collecting oral histories on the student strike back in 1968. He said students had to create their own spaces to learn about their own history. There was something called the Experimental College, which was a student-run initiative for them to teach their own for them to teach their own classes. Fierra said that the Black Student Union had its own class, so that was another space. But the students just didn't learn untold histories. They connected them to the ongoing struggles against systemic issues plaguing their communities, including poverty, police brutality, and the lack of affordable housing. It was in an era of young people asking questions and wanting to transform their communities. Fierra explained that impulse, that hunger to transform one's community, is actually what forms the basis of ethnic studies. How can we go about maintaining this transformative practices, especially with our young scholars in the era of social media? Told you it was a mouthful.
I appreciate that question. I appreciate the idea of engaging, making things salient and relevant, and then also noting the technology, right, the social media. The way I would take that question first, especially in the spirit of stories, we can note, as both of you did, specific time periods with which we say ethnic studies was initiated, right? We talk about the 1968 strikes in San Francisco State. We talk about Berkeley. We can also talk about Northridge, right? We can talk about things on the East Coast as well. And indeed, you're right. The fact that you all had the course here at that early time, it was really early in the era. I also like to look at, and then sometimes also scholars will say, but if we wanted to look before those dates, we can look at Carter G. Woodson, right? We can look at his work with the Miseducation of the Negro and the Association for the Study of Negro Life and Culture and all of the work he did in that regard. I like to say that although not on the historical timeline for the development of ethnic studies, we can actually look at the impulse to that way back, right? We can look at Tecumseh and the Prophet and them establishing Prophetstown and gathering up different tribal communities to say, let's re-engage our culture, let's re-engage our language, let's re-engage our spirituality, and let's turn away from external influences that are hurting us. And there were also other elements to that too. There was a militant element of what have you. We can see it about 100 years later with the Ghost Dance Rebellion as well, But we could actually go even further back, and we could actually see it with the establishment of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, right? Because we can see those kinds of, right? But that's the impulse toward it, right? If we know the history of the church, right? When Richard Allen and Absalom Jones were in church, and it was an integrated church. It was the Methodist Episcopal Church, right? And at the time, it was increasingly becoming a segregated church. And there was a certain point in which Absalom Jones was directed to leave his pew and to go back and sit in the back. This is in the 1700s, okay? Absalom Jones said, "Let me finish my prayer, please." Absalom Jones and Richard Allen said, "If the congregation protests this move, then we'll stay. But at the close of my prayer, if everyone sits silent," and he's talking about the white parishioners, right? If everyone sits silent, we are walking. They walked. And with a few plot lines in between, they established the African Methodist Episcopal Church. So I like to say that the impulse toward liberation, toward fighting cultural deprivation, it's perennial. It's present with us. It has to be woken up a lot of times, right? And so, to your question about how we do this with the youth today, the first thing really does begin with the youth voice. And then the second thing begins with critical amplification of some of that stuff. Ethnic studies, I say, it starts right where you're standing. And so we have to listen much more, I think. And we have to listen to the stories, we have to tell the stories as well. From the social media standpoint, and I realize that was a contextual element of the question, but still, it's also a very dynamic pedagogical element because there are folks using social media to trip the algorithms, to resist the algorithms, and turn them into pedagogical devices to teach critical content. In and around the Sacramento region, there's a lot of school districts who have ethnic studies collectives, and they're using Instagram wonderfully to put out critical messages. Stockton, Woodland, certainly Sacramento as well. Others I'll probably think of later on. So, Dr. Small, anything to that?
I can't speak for other academic disciplines, but I can speak for sociology. And so you have these scholarly types of people. I refer to them as the big brain people. And they think and they write and they do what they do, and then it kind of slowly trickles down, and then it becomes these academic disciplines. Whereas ethnic studies, for me, it's community, students. I love the term impulse. It's like they, especially the students in the Bay Area, they loved education. They respected education. They also knew that when they graduated with their diplomas, there'd be gaping holes in what they learned. And they wanted that to change. And not just to change for themselves, but to change for all the students. That's what you do when you take the curriculum and you do something with it. And so I love the thought of impulse. And so for me, in how I interpret ethnic studies, we always have to remember that past or whatever, so there always has to be that bridge to the community, and to the students. I feel my own kind of, I feel an urge or compelled to check in with my students in how they're learning the material or how the material might change. So there's that piece of it. And then we were talking before this started, I began my career in the Sacramento area. Kind of my mental home was Sacramento City College, and I like to fancy that I'm not some old person, but the first time I went into the classroom and I showed a video, and it was a projector. It was a reel-to-reel, you take the film and you string it through. I don't have that technology now. And thank goodness I don't have it now, so it's like that, and maybe, ooh, look, we have this fancy VHS machine, or oh look, you have this cart that you can wheel around, as whatever the technology or the visuals are in the classroom. And now it's beyond all of that. Now I can be in a classroom in real time and say, hey, one of you, take your phone and look up whatever, whatever it is that we're talking about, or the, me being able to send them out and research certain things online, or, and I don't have to really kind of think much about it. So I think that there's just this, I think it's important, and I was one of those people when the pandemic hit, and they said, hey, everything needs to go online, and I just had a blank look on my face, like, what? So I've had my own life lessons over the last 2 years about kind of reminding myself that I'm not over here with this kind of reel-to-reel projector. I'm over here with these screens and these learning platforms. So that's.
Oh, thank you. So
appreciate that question.
I
appreciate
think
the answer.
You kind of dovetail into this next question I'm going to have for you first, and of course, Dr. Allen, you can chime in. So according to Dr. Sapp, Professor of Humanities and Teacher Education at the College of Mount St. Vincent, ethnic studies is a threat to seeing things only this way because it insists on seeing things otherwise. It insists on seeing things clearly through the lens of history and not disguised, denied, or obliterated. How do we maintain or strengthen this threat of ethnic studies?
You know what? If you take, for example, Ethnic Studies 101, and then you're done with the class, and then you want to get online and you want to talk about how much you hate it and how much it's the devil's playground, or Mike Somino is un-American, or that I'm brainwashing students or whatever, then at least I'll shrug and say, well, at least you have some sort of context. Versus, ethnic studies is this and ethnic studies is that, and it's like, okay, well, like, what's your relationship to it? No, I don't have one. And it's like, well, yippee for your opinion. One of the things, forever I'll probably have a love affair with sociology, and I liked teaching sociology. But when you walked into a classroom all day, every day, it's the academic discipline of sociology. You're going to be exposed to the canon of sociology. Whereas one of the things that I have loved about ethnic studies is just we go everywhere. I literally can go into a classroom and it's like, hey, today it's going to feel like a history classroom, or hey, today it's going to feel like psychology, or lit, or wherever I'm pulling from. And so there's kind of that, to me, there's that strength in the interdisciplinary aspects of it. And so, yes, there's going to be the boohoo, critique, whatever, that's always going to be there. So that's that piece of it. That's that piece of it. I also, one of the things that I personally experienced when I was going through my academic, undergraduate and graduate school and all that, were the moments where I was in a classroom with a professor who was going to be pushing their agenda or their interpretation of the academic discipline of whatever, and that you needed to agree with it and you needed to regurgitate it back, or you were going to be retaliated against. And so I really loathe that kind of technique or methodology, and so I just straight up tell my students, I'm going to expose you to what I think is the canon of ethnic studies. You take it with any which way you want to. You want to believe me, you want to discount me, you want to like it, you want to dislike it, you want to whatever. The offer is there. It's kind of like opening the door. I'm going to open the door, kind of give you a few heads up about what it looks like through the door, but I ain't going to push you through it. So, at least in my classes, I think that kind of diminishes some of that anxiety or irrational anger or whatever.
You must be clairvoyant, because the next question I have for you, although I'm going to give Dr. Ellender a chance to respond, is because of your book title, and hopefully we're going to go into that later, this kind of anti-chauvinism associated with ethnic studies, and you kind of hit on that. So we're going to revisit that with the next question. But Dr. Allender, I want to give you opportunity to opine as well.
Yeah, so I tell my students ethnic studies is an oppositional discipline. It started that way, and the opposition is really principally against cultural deprivation. The various things that you named, right, housing and what have you earlier, those are cultural experiences, right? I mean, they're physical, right? We have a shelter, we eat food or whatever, but all of those are cultural experiences. And for BIPOC folk, we've always been subjected to one form or other of cultural deprivation. American Psychological Association says cultural deprivation comes in 3 types. One is when BIPOC folk are kept from accessing the dominant culture. They don't say the dominant culture, they say the larger society, the larger culture, right? Well, we know what that means. Well, yes, we're kept from accessing, as you said, right? Housing and education and medical care, et cetera. Second thing APA says is it's when you don't have access to your own culture. The third thing they say is when really you don't have access to cultural stimulation, period. But we've been subjected to all 3 of those things. And so ethnic studies is pushing against all of that all the time. And I say if it's not actually, then it might be something different than ethnic studies, right? It might be. And so how do we ensure that? One way, obviously, is by rhetoric that I put out there, but also by showing real examples. In Sacramento and in the state of California, when an organization called Ethnic Studies Now was established to create high school resolutions in school districts to require a graduation requirement. We met as a collective for 3 years at my home every other Sunday. Teachers, students, community members, professors, and we organized. And we had a communications wing, and then we intersected with other folks throughout the state. The long story short is, yes, LA has a requirement. San Francisco has a requirement. Oakland has a requirement. Sacramento has a requirement. Woodland has a requirement. Stockton has a requirement, right? And I could list others that are, even much smaller districts. And then the state now has a requirement. Prior to that, we worked on probably 5 different resolutions. The first one, it passed unanimously amongst the House and the Senate in the state of California. It was vetoed by the governor. Next thing came along, it was altered, right? It was supposed to be a high school graduation, but what we wrote then when the politicians got together, they changed it and they said, well, let's make it a model curriculum that the state's going to pay for. So that's what they did, and they passed that, but then they didn't even want to fund that. So we had to come back. Well, they did. Long story short, there's lots of plot lines in there. But the point I'm getting at is relentless. We have to be relentless. It's an oppositional discipline. Now, I do want to say, though, that takes a toll on our physicality as well, right? Like, quite literally. So there's things that we have to do, right? And so in my courses, we always begin with some land acknowledgement, and we even talk about land back movement as well, right? We also then acknowledge ancestry. We then get into mindfulness practices, and then very conscious relationship building moves. Now, pre-COVID, that required touch, because ethnic studies isn't anti-science. Touch is about what we used to say philosophically is, we're building community, and we're engaged, and we feel good, and we get the spirit going. Well, now we know it's also neurotransmitters too, right? It's facilitating the flow of oxytocin and, what have you. So all those things are important, and even then sometimes it's important in the middle of the class to do that. Last thing I want to say in this is, especially right now, especially right now, I'm finding that it's always been challenging to introduce certain topics. I left the high school classroom under death threat, quite literally, quite literally. But right now,
Now you see why he's my mentor, huh?
but right now, it's really tough. The idea of triggering trauma is very real. And so the way in which I'm finding we have to approach things and talk about things has to be much, much more mindful of what folks are going through. And I mean that of people, period, but I especially mean that of BIPOC folk, right? I mean, the world is showing every single day that the conditions are I don't want to say stacked against. I don't want to buy into the anti-critical race theory arguments, but you can't help but look at the TV even, not even social media, right? And we see World War III, it has already started. We're not going to do this because we don't want a world war. It's already started. There's multiple countries involved, right? Here's the dictator, here's the force of democracy. And black folks still can't get on the bus or the train or the cabs, right? So we have to teach that all the time, but we have to understand that we have to be extremely more mindful of taking care of ourselves and those who are in our care when we're teaching the importance of those resistance discourses.
That is really powerful because as a person that's really still kind of raw, those type of trigger warnings, those type of mindfulness, those type of setting that environment and tone and everything is really important because as my colleague and I talk about, and I'm going to ask the next question, we throw around the term safe spaces too often and not really deconstructing what that really means. And then even once you create that safe individual space, they have to exit. And they still have to navigate unsafe terrain. So that's a whole nother dissertation.
So we want to create courageous spaces.
Yes.
Courageous spaces, which do require some safety.
Yes.
It means I'm not going to jump down your throat if you say something foolish,
Yes.
right?
Some dissent, right?
I am going to say something,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And that's what's important.
Yes.
So apologize, you were still asking
I
your
want
questions.
to just piggyback on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
My doctoral, my PhD is in education, and I wrote my doctoral dissertation on cultural taxation, the experiences of faculty of color who work in predominantly white institutions. And so I'm interviewing all these folks, and I'm getting the deep kind of testimonials. And the last question that I asked everybody, and many of these people were my mentors or people that I looked up to, what do you do for yourself? Mm-hmm. Like, how do you decompress? How do you, and I, for a social scientist, I don't exist in a world of 100%. But I can tell you 100% of the people that I interviewed answered the same way, that they didn't do anything. They knew they should, but they weren't. And it was like a who's who of like hypertension or diabetes or their blood pressure or their whatever. And then I had to look in the damn mirror. And because in kind of just the way things work or operate or whatever, there is this kind of toxic nature to what we do, or especially if you're a person, and I can just set aside ethnic studies, but if you happen to be someone who wants to engage on your campus, or you're somebody who wants to, kind of hold the community or the campus or your state or your city or your county, hold it to the standards that it brags about or claims on its website, that work gets extremely taxing. Then you do this work. And you do this work exactly like you're saying, with the potential of receiving a death threat because someone didn't like the comments that you made about some riot that took place 100 years ago. And it just, so yesterday, it's early March, and we're in the Willamette Valley. So, oh my God, if you see the sun, you better acknowledge that. And so here's the sun, it's the end of the day. I wheeled out my grill and fired it up. And I had a beer. And then a dear friend of mine, colleague from work, called my cell phone. And I looked at my cell phone, and I was like, hell no. So I let it go, and then I took a picture of the grill and the burgers and the beer. And then I texted him, and I was like, nah. Even if we would have been, BSing about random things, work would have squeezed into that conversation. And I told him, I'm like, I'm decompressing right now. Also, while I was grilling, then occasionally I was going over to where my younger son was shooting hoops, and he graciously hands me the ball so I can clank it off the rim or whatever. But I had on my dad hat and my husband hat and my community hat. I was not the coordinator of ethnic studies, and I've had to learn those types of behaviors. I mean, it was just last Sunday, mentally, I'm debating with myself, don't turn on work email. Don't look at final papers. And so this mindfulness and these things that, and I can give everybody in here advice about, how to relax and how to do this and how to do that. And then sometimes I'm my own worst enemy when it comes to workload and things of that nature.
We are. It's also the cultural taxation you just referenced to earlier, right? So it's a it goes like that.
Yeah.
The racial battle fatigue that both of you all just described is just so very real that we navigate it, and it takes this toll on our physiological, just on our person, right? In so many different capacities. It's real. And if we don't just shut off, like you were alluding to, we don't, because we feel like we have to always be on. You know what I mean? Like that stereotype threat. So we know it's out there, so we have to prove it wrong, right? But no, we can push back against it and say, no, I'm good. I don't have to do all these things and be everything to everybody, but not to myself, right? So, next question. Yeah, you guys threw me off now. I was like, oh.
I think they're out to both of us.
It's okay. Yeah, it doesn't matter. So Dr. Allender, and then, you threw me off. And plus everybody's texting me too, saying this is great. So according to Associate Professor Barnd and Chair of Ethnic Studies, just up there in Oregon State University, so shout out to him. Ethnic studies matters because we are, again, always faced with twisted words and disingenuous concerns over racism that seeks to snap and discard the very tools of liberation and freedom we have crafted over 5 decades and across 5 centuries. The misspoken and sneered phrase, critical race theory, is the most current and cultural symbol beyond rhetorical sharpening in order to try to gut ethnic studies, to spill its blood in plain sight, and to call it self-defense. To that end, what are the ways in which ethnic studies scholars and practitioners might mitigate the field from becoming just a trendy political hashtag?
Part of my answer to that is my answer previously even. We have to be relentless and we have to be organizing. But there's other things to say about that. First, I want to give a plug to Marc Lamont Hill, Black News Tonight. I don't know if you all have that here in Oregon, but in California, and I know that it's national. I get it on Xfinity, Black News Channel. It's about 1.5 years old, and Marc Lamont Hill comes on every night at 5 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and midnight. He has Black News Tonight. He's been doing an amazing job interviewing mostly anti-critical race theory folk. And what is very interesting to me is that he actually goes into the black community and asks the black conservatives. And then he also goes into the folks who are championing these issues from the origin, right? Some of the think tank folks. And then he also interviews folks who are running for office in various places. And he always says, for my audience, because they might not know, can you just tell me what critical race theory is? Can you just tell me one thing you've read that is a critical race theory piece? And 80%, 90% of the time, the answer is no. And I say 80 to 90 because there are times when he's got somebody in there who has. But those times that he has somebody who has, oftentimes they are, their scholarship is way out here, and they engage in an attempt to trip him up. But Marc Lamont Hill is a scholar, and he tracks them, and then he's able to respond point for point. I highly recommend it, and if you don't have it, you can YouTube the segments, because they're all on YouTube. All that is to say is that Marc Lamont Hill did a really important deconstruction of this whole process. He says, everything that is anti-black, anti-BIPOC, has been put up under the title of critical race theory. Right? Everything, oops. And then it's turned into legislation, so that now we can't actually even talk about the civil rights movement at all. But that's actually not critical race theory, right? That's history. Right? We can't read Toni Morrison's novels in some places, right? But that's not critical race theory. That's literature. Right? I get it. Critical race theory draws upon a lot of different fields, right? Literature and so on and so forth. But that's not how those arguments are being used. So everything that is supposed to be about ethnic studies, multicultural education, intersectionality, et cetera, it's called critical race theory, it's demonized, and then it's codified in legislation. So we're having these straw arguments. And the thing is that people don't actually really even care whether they're accurate or not, because mostly they know. We are really trying to stamp that out. They've been doing that. Let's go back to the 1600s and 1700s. My good friend from the SoCal ACLU, Amir Whitaker, has put out an interactive map of laws in this hemisphere, the Caribbean islands, southern United States, all the way up the coast, where just one thing was outlawed. Drums. They've been trying to outlaw drums, right? And the language is in the laws. This is subversive communication. This is causing disunity amongst the folk that we're working with, right? All of these things that really are a form of cultural deprivation, once again. So to say, we don't want you to talk about the civil rights movement. We don't want you to talk about, the desegregation movement. We don't want you to talk about, it's just like in the 1800s when David Walker's Appeal was outlawed. Literally, that one book in the state of North Carolina was made illegal. Why? Because David Walker was trying to appeal to the masses of enslaved folk to say, get up. Anything that is structured into the system, it's been put on the backs of folk of color. And so to speak against that is dismantling that system. So the folks don't want you to do that. So we actually should not be too surprised that these kinds of moves are made. But just because we shouldn't be surprised, it doesn't mean we shouldn't be skillful in trying to, work to combat them. And as I see a lot of the laws banning this book and that book, well, I see all kinds of wonderful subversive stuff happening as well, right? Ibram X. Kendi has got this banned books event that's happening. And even before the banned books event, he had the Anti-Racist Book Festival that was out, right? So we have to continue to be subversive about this. This is really what we have to continue to do. And we have to continue to resist it. And, like for 3 years, every other Sunday in my living room where we planned, that's the kind of work. That's the kind of work we do.
Very grassroots.
In and out of the classroom. In and out of the classroom.
Very grassroots. Dr. Shelton, anything you want to add?
Yeah. If there's some horrible racial thing that happens in our country, I don't grab my fan and fan myself. Oh, heavens. I didn't see that coming, because we don't have a history of this type of behavior. I mean, he literally just broke down for you tenet number 1 in critical race theory. There's only 6. Isn't that like some, some mystery? It's like, number 1 is this stuff is historical. It's not just an individual, these things that happen. It is this massive kind of a pattern, and we just need to acknowledge that. That's it. Then we move on. In early April, I'm flying to Sacramento, of all places, for an academic conference. I'm still going to wear my mask, but it is the first time that I will engage in that kind of behavior, getting on a plane and being around strangers and so on. And I have this thing that I call my magic hat. It ain't like the sorting hat. That's like a real magic hat. My magic hat is just a ball cap. It's a baseball cap. But when I put it on, and I tried this a few years ago, I flew to Knoxville, Tennessee for a regional ethnic studies conference. And I thought to myself, you know what? I'm sick of getting special treatment at airports, meaning pulled out of line and extra, whatever. I met some sort of profile. And I thought to myself, you know what? Put on your military ball cap that indicates, that you are a military veteran. Damn! Next thing you know, thank you for your service, and thank you for your service, and thank you for your service, and let's just move you on through these lines. That's why I started calling that my magic hat. I'm gonna put my magic hat when I fly to Sacramento, because really, I'm not in the mood to be messed with. And, so if you come into my faculty office and you'll see the, old protest flags and, maybe imagery that might irritate some people, and you're going to see pictures of me in uniform holding a weapon. And it just happened as it happened that I took a leadership role in creating the Maxwell Student Veteran Center that we have on this campus. And so for some of the people who had already decided that I was the diversity devil because I was the coordinator of ethnic studies, these are usually the same people that feel compelled to thank me for my service. When I'm, that's just one of the tenets of critical race theory, intersectionality. So when it took me a year to write my ethnic studies textbook. It's an introductory ethnic studies textbook. From chapter 1, where I was writing about critical race theory, in silence, with crickets. This is over 20 years of teaching critical race theory in the Southern Willamette Valley, just quietly. By the time I got to the end of my book, which a year later, I'm on chapter 8, dang, next thing I know, it's like, oh, it's an ebook, so I don't know how you burn it. But I can kind of symbolically think.
Self-destruct.
Yeah. Actually, what I would love is for the book to get banned, because then really more people would know about it. But yeah, so.
So, well, again, I think you're clairvoyant, because this next question is along that same line. So according to Demetrius Hobson, who was I guess he was an educator at TFA, stated, why is critical scrutiny of our history, or better yet, the quest for a more accurate history, somehow unpatriotic? And I was struck with the realization, more of a reminder, really, that many in our nation are still invested in the myth of white innocence and supremacy, and that any interpretation of evidence that demystifies those myths is considered un-American. Critically conscious educators are not attacking, but merely pointing out that America and every other government has fallen short of its ideals. It's simply a fact, and facts matter. So, Dr. Samano, please speak about the axiomatic tropes of anti-patriotism associated with ethnic studies, because you kind of already was going that road. So I teed you up really good, so go ahead.
In my quest to decompress, so I'm looking at my phone and I'm deciding, I'm going to watch something. And I thought, okay, you know what? I'm going to watch this thing called 1883. And I try to watch it, and I'm like, oh. I'm just trying to be mindful of my language. For those out there in the world who know me. So then I tried again. So on the third try, I got into the show. Okay, so the 1883 it's like a prequel kind of show to this other show, Yellowstone. And so we're gonna watch these white folks in their covered wagons, going across the plains. And I was like, all right, oh, it's not so bad. It's like that game, the Oregon Trail game, where I've never been able to get like 10 miles outside of town, and next thing you know, I broke my damn leg and had to be put down, or I got bitten by a snake, or I drank the bad water, or whatever. So I can I'll straight up tell you right now, I would not have been able to make that damn trip on foot in some crappy ass shoes, and that's a hell of a damn thing to imagine coming to, say, Oregon. And I can respect that idea of that thought or that history. But to think that they came here and it was just this beautiful space and no one else was here, that's damn ridiculous. So for me, trying to, this idea of innocence or this idea of literally whitewashing history just makes me sick to my damn stomach. And I'm not an either or kind of person. I'm not saying, okay, now to hell with those stories. Now we're going to focus on the indigenous peoples and others that were other people of color that were here too. And lots of mechanisms in place to kind of make people go away. And that, as in like, we're going to whip you until you, get the idea as a person of African ancestry to get the hell out of our landmass, or we're going to march you places and put you on reservations and do whatever. Lots of creative ways to terrorize people and put genocide on people. I'm more of we teach all of it. We teach all of it, and then it's to have that critique. Like, well, you're messing with the narrative, or you're messing with the history, or whatever. It's like, I want the complete picture. I want it out there, and it's fascinating. Look, at my first year here in 1999, there were staff members, fellow faculty, who were crystal clear on how much they didn't want ethnic studies here, and didn't want a full-time faculty member teaching here in that discipline. And so they were very enthusiastic to voice their opinions of me to my face and my what I was teaching and so on. And so I was accused of being a radical, whatever. And I was thinking to myself, damn, I don't think I've really been, I'm brand new faculty, I don't have tenure yet. I'm trying to be chill around here. And that's what you think is radical? Huh. I think I can do more around here. I think I can cause more trouble. I think it was a beautiful gift. Their ignorance and their bigotry was a beautiful gift, but So yeah, it's,
Well, I want to dig a little deeper before I get to Dr. Allner, because again, you did serve. And again, this is kind of leading to your book, or maybe you want to talk about it at that time. But like having those identities, right? Because you served and you're a scholar, you're teaching ethnic studies. And again, that is viewed as oxymoronic, right? How can you do that? I mean, you're supposed to be teaching the 1776 Commission. That. How dare you deviate to the literal dark side, right? So, I mean, talk a little bit about that. How you're able to navigate that, and what's that been kind of like?
There was a point recently where I was, prepping for class. Who knows what class it was? Who knows what the lesson plan was? I could have been going in any direction that I tend to go in. And then when I was done doing that prep, then I'm at home on my computer, not here at work, so don't start tripping out. Then I'm online trying to buy ammunition, because it's hard to get ammo these days. And
It is.
and just kind of the way I'm talking about that, it's like, what the hell? Yes, when I was a teenager, against my parents' wishes, because when you're 18, you can make life-altering decisions. And you don't really need any kind of advice from anybody. And I signed up, and I was, I guess, whatever degree of young and dumb. And essentially, I allowed myself to join what I would now call the colonial forces. And then I was stationed across the country. I was on a ship and then deployed all over the place. And then came home and literally, I was a student here. And it was kind of trippy. There were the moments where, I'm sitting in a classroom as a student, and I could look at the clock, and I could kind of imagine like what was going on my ship, and who was doing what, and so on. And so I don't know. I guess I've been kind of existing like that maybe for a while. And I think academically. So I transferred to the University of Oregon, and that was when I had my first faculty of color, and that was also when I started kind of learning or being exposed to the type of curriculum that I now teach, and it was pretty mind-blowing. And then I was fortunate enough to have a group of faculty who saw potential in me way, way before I ever saw it in myself. Because the navigating the academic world was pretty new and unknown. So I think that's part of it. I think the fact that I teach at these types of schools, and I'm drawn to these types of schools and these types of students or whatever, or the amount of times now that I've had student veterans come into my office pre-COVID, and they're kind of looking around. But they're taking ethnic studies with me, and I have multiple. Like, how'd you end up thinking the way you do? Because they classic. The amount of resources that the military has, and it's a fine-oiled machine. To take a civilian and then put them into this enclosed environment, and then multiple weeks later, you're a functioning member of that branch of service, willing to do lots of things that you wouldn't have thought possible as a civilian. And then it's your time to get out. And so I left my ship, got in a taxi, got on a plane, landed in Eugene. There was no reverse process. There was no okay, now multiple weeks of how to turn you back into a civilian. So that's why I think some of these students, they come in and so when I first got out, and I'll try to wrap this up, I went to my old high school for a basketball game. So it was just, I don't know why. Maybe I was with my siblings, or maybe something about me going back to the high school. Everybody stands for the national anthem. And I'm looking at everybody, and I may have been out of the military like 2 months or something at that point. And I was 23 when I got off active duty, and I was in the reserves for a couple years after that. But I was 23 years old, and I felt like I was about 70. And I looked at everybody standing up, and I thought to myself, I ain't standing up. This ain't no taking a knee for police brutality. This is me like, you know what? I ain't standing up. I'm sick of all of this, and I'm tired of it. And I've seen some really, really horrible human behavior. And a lot of it was on each other. People in the same, not us towards other people, but what we would do to each other. And so I just sat, and but back then people weren't freaking out and, oh my God, what are you doing? I think we're in a whole different mindset these days.
Oh, you're going to get some letters. Dr. Allender, what say you? And I know we have some questions coming in, so we want to get to some of them, and you all could, dialogue in between. But I know Dr. Lucius has some questions from our listening audience, and then we may have some from the people who are here. So same thing.
Yeah.
The patriotism or lack thereof, or the trope associated.
So I'll say two things, and briefly, based on other questions. The first thing is I applaud your story, and I hear in your story stories of Black Panther Party members, because those cats were all military when they got out. They were all, not every single one, right? But many of them, and especially the folks who just started. Bobby Seale was straight up military. And so, and they were at Laney College in Oakland, right? And then at Merritt College, pushing for ethnic studies, right? Like disrupting the official knowledge. But the other thing I just want to say about just that broad enterprise, again, to go back to Marc Lamont Hill, this time last year, he reported on Penn Museum's critique, right? People were critiquing Penn Museum because they discovered that they had the largest collection of human bones, right, anywhere. And that those bones, they had determined, many of them had come from grave robbers, and very specifically from enslaved Africans, some of them in Cuba, some in the United States. And it's like, yeah, okay, look, we're sorry. They issued an apology letter. We're working on some things, we're reconstructing, and they in fact were. A week later, they were forced to issue a second letter of apology, because it was determined that not only were they housing these bones, they had human remains of children who died in the bombing of the MOVE organization in Philadelphia. Yes.
1984. What, 84 or 6?
They had
Yeah.
bones from, and they were using them actively for an online course called Adventures in Forensics. It was a collaboration between Coursera, between Princeton, and Penn Museum. Democracy Now!'s Amy Goodman also reported on this. Here's the point of the story. That's the story, not the subversion. Right? What we're doing is, I think of Sekou Sundiata, right? On any given day, a good bounce. It's about rhythmic invention, seeking the light to explain this long terrain of things gone upside down. That's what we've been in the midst of. So these movements to push back, of course they're going to be seen as against that stream. But that stream is against humanity.
Oh, thank you for that. Dr. Lucia, you have some questions for them, not me.
So we have a couple of really good questions that have come in online, and one of them, Dr. Samanow was just actually referencing, and I know it's a conversation that's been happening a lot at Lane recently. So this comes from Jalen, and they ask, what do you say to those who are in spaces where ideas are hijacked, ownership is not fully acknowledged, and there are organizational goals that are claimed to matter, but the organization is falling short of living up to those claims? Should folks move on to where change can happen, or stay in a place where management is not really allowing the change to fully manifest?
That's a good question, man.
That's what I'm
That's a
looking
hot
for
potato. Here you go.
I'm still thinking about his last words.
Glad I don't have to answer this.
Well, it's a conversation. That's what I heard.
Yeah,
Dr.
it is.
Rashid.
With you two.
I exist in an odd world of tenure. So it's hard for me to respond to that because I have such deep privilege. You know, if it's like, you know what, cut your losses. You don't need that. Well, damn.
It is tough when you have tenure and you've been here for a while, right? And I think sometimes this question was directed to me, but we have to look outside of ourselves, right? Even though it's direct, we're the ones in it, right? But we have to look, it's almost like it's very Sankofish, right? So you have to, you know, look forward to go back, right? And vice versa, because you have to play it forward for our ancestors who've done that heavy lifting to make sure we're able to be in the situation that we're in. So even though it gets very, I'm gonna make up a word, defecatious, like that, I tried not to do it.
Crazy, because the other word was floating around in here just now.
I do. Even though things get shoddy, right, really tough and everything, and we often consider the grass being greener on the other side. So it's easy to just, sometimes it's easy to say, you know what, enough of this stuff, right? But I think it goes back to what you were talking about is the self-care, right? To make sure that you're taking care of yourself, that you're removing yourself from that element, that you're reviving and regenerating yourself. Analogous to like when we used to go on to conferences, right? And then like, okay, now we're ready to go back into those spaces. Those are important elements to make sure you have longevity in what you're doing, because it's not gonna be always peaches and cream. You have to have surrogates, you have to have jignas, mentors, other folks that you could cry, vent, get the things off your proverbial chest, right? And that's necessary. It may not be all the ingredients to make you stay and deal with all the, you know, things that you're navigating, but it may assist you in, you know, kind of like, you know, staying there a little bit longer. And then, but again, what are you doing it for? You know, I always say it's about the babies, right? And so it's not about Dr. Rashid, it's about the babies, the work that we can do to impact the babies. And if it stops being about that work, then yeah, I might strongly consider doing something different. So that's my 2 cents, but it was for you all.
No, I'm not in disagreement with what either of you said, and I appreciate the honest reflection. I sit here in the same regard. I do feel you on the self-care part. I especially appreciate the last thing you said, because what I heard you say was stay true to mission and always be observant if your comrades are too. If they're not, it doesn't mean, my answer, that you jump ship necessarily, but that has to be a question you ask yourself if there's not adherence to that mission. I also believe that every organization, every institution is made by humans, so that's all fallible. It's all fallible. It's all, our very brains are structured so we can be contradicting, right? We contradict our own thoughts. If we can have, there's a word for it in neuroscience, mutual, I'm not a neuroscience, I can't remember the number, but that we can hold contradictory perspectives. And so if we can do that, we do that in our institutions too. And so we have to be very, very mindful of being true to mission, and we have to be mindful of when we no longer are, or the people who we're kicking it with no longer are. And maybe we don't break the relationship off. Maybe, I don't know, depends on the situation. But maybe we're not working together in the same capacity. And we can look at current organizations, like even Black Lives Matter, who's processed that, right? Even in my very specific locale, Black Lives Matter Sacramento, right? Lots of different shifts. We can look at the Black Panthers, right? We can look at the nation. We can, so.
I like
That's
that
a
answer
constant.
because, I mean, with this question, I would engage with this person, to get more context. I have been able to, I was going to use the word survive, but you know what? I have thrived. I have thrived here since 1999 because of the relationships that I have built on this campus and in the community.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's where I would be with this person. It's like, well, before I give, some sort of answer, are you just kind of there or, just kind of on your own? Because then that ain't a battle worth engaging in because of the degree of kind of things that can come back on you. But if if the person has a support network on or off campus, hopefully both, then, I think, and then we all know this. We all know like when I was a fiery loudmouth, I'm about to describe myself now, but the one from his 20s at the University of Oregon causing trouble, where I didn't know how to not pick and choose my battles. It was just everything. Everything was a battle, and so now I feel like I'm probably more strategic in what I do on campus. So that's when I hear the question, which is excellent, and then I'm kind of thinking about how I would actually not just respond to this question, but interact with the person asking the question to get more context.
Okay. All right.
Thanks.
And then the next question is both an acknowledgement and a question, and it comes from Siobhan. Firstly, thank you so much as mentors, as educators, and as men for acknowledging the mental and psychological toll of this work. It's so important that has to come into practice and that you are actively teaching and requiring that. So my question is about balance in the face of relentlessness. What is the most important tool you've gathered through your work and experience that you can share with us?
Ancestry. Ancestry. It doesn't stop giving.
Mike.
Doesn't stop. Doesn't stop. It's a font of knowledge and information and certainly compassion, but sometimes with a rod. And I say that because my ancestors are with me all the time, and they're, so that's to me the most important is ancestry. We look at our ancestry, we look at our history, we look at our spirituality, we can see if we're in the right place or if we need to be doing something different.
Dr. Samano?
To get up here on a stage, to have this thing clipped on, to have a camera going, I have to have a lot of trust in Dr. Rashid like trust that he's not going to put me into a situation that's going to somehow do something to me. So I have to have that high degree of trust that he has my best interests at heart. So there's that. Because I mean, I'm a straight up introvert, and I would rather be quietly somewhere just like reading a book. I feel also like my ancestors are always with me. Not only do they have my back, but then I'm processing, and some people that are watching are about to start laughing, I'm processing my behavior. As in, like, what do my ancestors think about that? And yeah, so for those of you out there that are laughing right now, you know what? My ancestors are very flexible. Especially when I'm in meetings and I drop the F-bomb. Back off. And then there's my immediate family. One of the things I like about ethnic studies is the sense of urgency about it. That I'm teaching this stuff, but you know what, at the end of the day, and I tell my students this all the damn time, because I want them to transfer, I want them to graduate, transfer, go get their university degrees, and if they're ready to leave this region, be at peace. If they choose to stay here and then they become my neighbor, I want them to damn be decent people. That's all I ask, as in, don't burn a cross on my damn lawn. I don't think that's really much to ask for. So I think that's part of it. And I just happen to have 2 sons. Look, I don't know ultimately what pronouns they're going to use in the future. I'm just being lazy right now and in context saying I have 2 sons. And then when people, whoa, what are your ultimate goals in raising 2 sons? I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I just want them to not be rapists. Maybe, like they walk a good path. Maybe that's what I hope for. Maybe that's what I hope for myself. And so I feel like all of those things probably encapsulate what I'm thinking for that answer.
Okay. Well, what we're going to do right now, as I have my colleague, Dr. Lucia, with the mic that she's not going to relinquish, is for our audience that may have questions for these 2 scholars, maybe myself, but mainly these 2 because they're while you all are here, right? You didn't come to hear me. You wanted to hear them.
There was something else that was brought up earlier, and I ain't done.
Oh.
But, I mean, yes, let's do the mic, but I'm still tripping out on bones.
Oh.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but
We could have that conversation. Okay. All right.
yeah, when it's over.
This is a question for both guests. You have a vast amount of knowledge and information. And so as authorities in what you teach and present, my question would be, what would be your goals for each class or session that you teach, as far as if it was perfect, what would you want your audience to leave with when you finished? At a minimum and at a maximum, what would your ultimate goal be as far as what they leave with?
We're all looking at each other. And we have students here. And so it's a wonderful question. It's requiring us to say that to them at this moment, which hopefully we do, right? Say what we want. But you put it in such a rich way. I would definitely want them to have additional information and knowledge, but that's not sufficient. I will want their heart to be moved. Maybe I'm there with what you were saying a little while ago, right? I want that kind of internal transformation. And then I want that, I think I'm really diddling you, right? Because then I want that to manifest in some form of action in the world, right? So yes, information and some spiritual movement, and then some action in the world. That's what I would want to see them all engage in. Yeah.
So my claim, that's all it is, my claim, So I'm going to do like in the here and the now of one day when it's like a Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock in the morning. So what's going to happen in that moment, and then I'll do the bigger picture. My crappiest day of teaching still is better than almost every single one of my colleagues on this campus. That is the degree to which I kick ass in the classroom.
Mic drop.
It full on, work up a sweat, performance art in what I do. And there are those moments, those moments where I walk out of a classroom like the planets have aligned, and I knew it was the perfect day of lecture or whatever we were doing. And then I reflect on that like, damn, well, why was that day any better than those other days? What the heck? It's like the curse of getting oh, you're a great instructor. Here's a certificate. And it's like, well, what about every other damn year? What the hell? What I would hope, maybe in the daily grind, is that just maybe the students heard something. Maybe they didn't, because our students, they have so much damn burden, where it's like they're working, or they're worried about getting food on their table, or they got to go talk to their parole officer right after class, or they're having domestic violence in the home, or it's just on and on and on and on. So if they're carving out time to be with me, then I need to make that matter. So however that gets defined. And then the other part, the bigger picture, I think, is that, like, you're going to be my neighbor. It's like, we're going to be friendly towards each other. We're gonna go kind of lean in the same, kind of direction of if our country is saying all these lofty things, then we're going to try to work hard towards that, or maybe even our state, or maybe even our city, or whatever. So I mean, it's because having more or less freshmen and sophomores for my entire career, versus people at, say, a university or whatever. Maybe the things that are happening in my classroom kind of swirl around and swirl around and swirl around, and it might be like 5 or 6 or 7 or even 10 years later. Somebody might email me, I was one of your students, blah, 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 and it's like, here's what's happening now, So yeah, I appreciate that. Appreciate what you asked, for sure.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions? We've got a few more minutes.
I'm not sure if I've formulated quite the question that's really deep in me, but I'm thinking about deprivation and what you spoke about deprivation before, and those 3 parts of access to the dominant culture, and then what was it, that you can't access your own culture, and I forgot the third one. Complete shut off from. So I was thinking about this in terms of who I've experienced in terms of the dominant culture here in the United States. And oftentimes my experience is people who have been in some way cut off from their ethnic roots in some way, shape, or form. And then I think about my own children who are bicultural, biracial, and I'm wondering, like, how does biculturalism or multiculturalism in an individual, how can ethnic studies be a place of hope, for lack of a better word, for people who have experienced in the dominant culture, who I think have experienced this deprivation of loss of access, or maybe given up access. And then for me, who's come from a very specific, I came here when I was 6 years old from an ethnic group. People say you're Indian, but that's not my ethnic group. That's my nationality. My ethnic group is Malayali. So I came from that group, but there's no real connection for me in the world that I grew up in with other Malayalis. And so so I develop relationships with people in a multicultural way. And then my kids are this new human being.
That's a rich question. It's an important question. And so I speak kind of strident, and I say these things, and I make specific references. And most of the references that I've made, right, into the Black Panther Party and, African American culture. But St. Patrick's Day, I have to acknowledge the Irish ancestry that I have also, right? Now, they didn't come over through Ellis Island. They were indentured servants, right? But I know that because I've gone and I've researched and I've looked up and I've gone to look for the stories. Wade Nobles, one of the founders of Black Psychology Association, quotes Cheikh Anta Diop on this concept of cultural security. And he says cultural security is, first, cultural security isn't in the sense of multinational militarism, right? We have to protect, certain, right? Cultural security is more in the quality of transmission of culture. And so Nobles, quoting Diop, says that we need three things. And the first is we have to get the historical line, the story. We have to find the stories. And those stories are not always going to come from a blood relative. They may come from an educational institution, or they may come from a social network, or they may come from the books and the archives, right? So that's the one piece, is the stories. The other thing he says is the aesthetics, the poetry, the musing. And so it's a particular kind of engagement in that. And once again, where do we get that from, right? It is an effort to break the process of deprivation. Cultural deprivation in the US, I speak of it mostly from a US-based standpoint because that's where I am. But it's throughout the world, right? What's happening in Ukraine is many things, and one thing that it is cultural deprivation, right? They're destroying cultures over there. So from a US-based standpoint, though, it's really not just a single event. It's the historic experience and the contemporary experience of living, because even though the culture survives, and that's another conversation in terms of how it survives. That's cultural ingenuity, cultural innovation, and different communal practices. But even though it survives, things happen to us, right? Reuven Feuerstein talks about when we haven't had that opportunity to have that kind of cultural transmission, there are social things that we aren't as swift with. Right? There's relationships that there's sometimes a withdrawal, right? Social awkwardness. Right? So there's consequences to cultural deprivation, even if we don't see the specific events that occur. And so those are the two things that I grab hold of from Wade Nobles in pursuit of cultural security. That's, to me, the antidote for cultural deprivation is cultural security.
And I think we have time for maybe one more in the audience, maybe one more. Okay, there it is there.
Mine's simple and short. My daughter's a student here, and so how can she take a class from you?
I mean, my first, kind of knee-jerk response is, well, here's my name, and tell her to sign up for a class. But my true response is, she needs to talk with an academic advisor, and she needs to make sure that whatever I teach kind of plugs into whatever they're trying to fulfill so they can go on to the next thing. Because in June, I've heard that LCC is going to have a live graduation event. And I don't know why, but I'm one of those people that always goes to graduation. And so put on my regalia, and that's what I tell my students. So you hear that, I'm scared of public speaking. So if you look at all the audience members and you imagine them without clothes on, and which sounds totally disgusting to me. I don't even know why that's a thing. But what I tell my students is, when I look at you, like on day one of a term, I envision everybody in caps and gowns, because that's what I want us to be there's lots that I want us to be working towards, but so I would say my classroom door is always open to your child, but so is my office door. And so if it's the correct path for them, I'm ready.
She wants to be a teacher, and so she's following in my footsteps and wants to go to Pacific like I did. So
That's
it was
great.
a while ago, though, because she's only been going part-time.
Yep.
I think it's
And she's a great student, so I'm sure she'll do well in your class. Speaking of classes and courses, we're gonna give some plugs for classes. So we have, what is it, child literacy? Children's literacy? Children's literature. My colleague, Dr. Lucia, is teaching, so if you haven't, listen, audience, students, make sure you register for that. And Dr. Salmano, what classes you want to plug?
For spring,
Yes, sir.
I have 2 courses in person. One section of Ethnic Studies 101 and one section of Ethnic Studies 102. And then I have this online asynchronous class that people can look at.
Okay. And
I'm gonna plug an event too.
go ahead.
April 2nd, Sac State has its 28th annual Multicultural Education Conference. It is virtual, but that's actually a good thing for us because you can all log into that. It's a free event. Our keynote speaker is Kyle T. Mays, whose book is on an Afro-Indigenous history of the United States. He is Black and Saginaw Chippewa, and he's done some really rich scholarship on the historic relationships between indigenous folk in the United States and African folk. And then also looking at biraciality within that community as well. We've got other speakers as well. We've got a short film on the living legacy of the Black Panther Party, which was produced by Panther Cubs, if you know the term, right? Folks who were the offspring of Black Panther Party members. And we also have some members in there as well. And then we'll have the producers and Amir Whitaker, who I referenced, the one who did the research on the drums. They're the closing panel as well. So what I would do is give the registration link to Dr. Rashid, and then he can make it public and available to folks.
Before I plug my class, and I want to give a chance for my colleague at the University of Pacific to plug any courses that they have, but I want you all to plug your books real quickly. Just give a brief synopsis and everything. So I'll start with you, Dr. Salmano. Give us a title and,
The
go out and get the book.
title of my book is Ethnic Studies, Dissent is Patriotic. And usually on Veterans Day, I put on a field jacket. It's a green field jacket with my name on it from when I was with the Navy Seabees, Construction Battalion. And I have a button on has a flag, and it says Dissent is Patriotic. And because I think that taking a knee because of law enforcement and their willingness to just kind of basically assassinate people for no reason, that is the type of Americanism that I aspire to. And it's just, really it's designed for kind of what I do. So it's just like chapter 1 is literally, what is ethnic studies? When was it created? And so getting into all those types of discussions, because I have a little kind of nerdy collection of hardbound books in my office. They're in a little corner. The oldest one is from the 1920s, and they can go 1920s to the 1950s. They all talk about what we're talking about here. So this idea, that, oh, which you're just making up this stuff and it's all new, and it's like, yeah, no, it's not. So chapter 1, kind of that, and then the rest of the chapters kind of get into the various populations of people that we look at in this country. And then we get to the very end of the textbook is kind of these ideas of trying to just tell people to be active and engaged in their communities. So yeah, that's...
And it's an ebook, correct?
Yeah, someone has already identified myself as a book nerd. During the pandemic, I was coming to campus and Zooming from my screen and teaching, and so I'm spending more time in my office, and I don't have anybody to visit with because I'm, by myself in my building. So I thought, I think I'm going to thin out my damn textbooks because it's getting too whatever. Right this second, if you were to come to my office and look, you would be like, what do you mean you thinned out your books? It's still full of books. And it's like, dang it. So yeah, unfortunately, it's an ebook, so it's only in digital form. But I will say, fortunately, when we had the inauguration with Biden, and there was a beautiful poem that was recited, that's linked in my book. So although I like, paper copies of things, I mean, my ebook has its own power and its own uniqueness. At least that's my claim.
Thank you for that.
Cool,
Get the
very
book.
cool, very cool.
Dr. Allender.
Yes, so the one I'm working on right now under contract with Rutledge is on cultural deprivation. And so a lot of what I shared tonight will be in print. Hopefully this time next year, because I'm behind, actually. But the one you're referencing, I think, is Our Stories and Our Voices, which is the textbook, the ethnic studies textbook that we put together for really initially in the Sacramento region, in that district. As part of our advocacy to get ethnic studies, they said, well, we don't have a course of study once it was approved. So you don't have a course of study. We'll write the course of study. We wrote all kinds of resources in there. They said, okay, well, we don't have a textbook. You have to have a textbook. I said, okay, well, we'll write the textbook. Right? But the thing is that we had just a few months before that course was supposed to start. So we just got something out as quick as we could. But we had an agreement with our publisher and the district that at the end of the semester, we want to sit down with those 9th and 10th graders and ask them what was worthwhile in that book, what was engaging, what was moving, and what was not, and what else do they want to see. And then we were going to produce a second edition. Well, we did that, and then we did that yet again because it was such a rich experience to get direct feedback from the students right after they were done with the semester. So it's in its it's in its second edition. The first was a preliminary, and there's a new edition we're also working on. So besides the fact that it has such immediate student response to it, it's also, many of the chapters are written by families, actually. My daughter has done photo essays in there. My son has written a chapter in there. My co-editor, who was an original striker, by the way, from Berkeley, he's written pieces in there about his grandmother. He's written pieces with his son. And then other folks have done similar kinds of pairings in there. It's largely an anthology. It's multi-genre, and it's richly visual. And that's directly due to the students saying, we want to see more. Give us more visuals. They also said, we want to see us in there. Not just us like this. We want to see us in our age groups. It's fine to learn about the Black Panthers, they said quite literally, but what about Black Lives Matter? Right? They wanted to see contemporary stuff as well as historic stuff. They even talked to us about font size and the captions versus the text, right? They wanted glossaries and they wanted repetition, all kinds of stuff. And we did it. The book is used in 3 school districts in the Sacramento region. It was used at Ohlone Community College. And I believe it will be used in 4th district as well. And I use it in some of my courses. My students who probably aren't with us anymore, they probably left because class ended, we use it in that class as well.
So, due to time, I just want to acknowledge some people out in the audience. I wanted to give them a chance to talk about things they're doing, but I have to start off with my I call her my auntie, but this is Linda Hamilton, who's Laney is the school board member. I want to thank her for coming out and all the support she gives me personally and all the babies in our district and her lovely husband. I want to acknowledge Ayana, who does great work with the United Way, and she really is an advocate of babies getting books in their homes. Really been doing tremendous work in that regard and other regards. And my colleague Shanae, who is now I think they're going to take off the interim. She's the coordinator, director of Lane Navigators, African American Success Program, who's doing great work. And we partnered to get Dr. Allerdale. So it was a collaboration. So this wasn't just, our MCC Ethnic Studies, MCC and the Office of Equity and Diversity and Inclusion here on Lane campus, but it was multifaceted collaboration to get us all here, social science, so on and so forth. Have my colleague here from the English department, Dr. Lucia, and my colleague from Pacific. They're doing great things in Pacific, who we're partnered with. And I want to acknowledge Randy, who says, be quiet and let's go home. So we're going to get out of here. Thank you, Randy, for all of you in the listening audience, thank you. And I want to give a plug to my class, Black Male Studies. So I just changed the modality to online. I would like Dr. Salmon, to do it in person. However, sign up for the class. It is the only Black Male Studies course in the state. So probably want to get on that. And so now that's online, you have an opportunity to do that. Again, Lane ESD, we have the Tiny Titan Summit coming up. There's a State of Immersion Conference. Go to the Lane ESD Black Student Success website, and there's a newsletter and everything. Get the information. A lot of work that's being done. So I know I'm over time. I want to acknowledge my colleagues in the Multicultural Center, Tracy Weimer, Mr. Evans, everybody who made this possible. Those of you who were here and those of you who aren't here, thank you. Yeah, you don't have to go home, but you know the rest. All right, peace.
Thank you all. Thank you for coming.